The world had ended 5 years ago, but Thomas Kincaid still lit a candle every night. The old farmhouse creaked with age and memory. Outside, the wind whispered through dead trees and cracked fences. Inside, Thomas, once a respected biology teacher, now just another weathered survivor, sat alone, surrounded by dusty books, rusted tools, and the ever-present silence of a broken world. He was 45 now. His hair, once thick and chestnut brown, was streaked with gray. His hands were calloused and worn from battles he never wanted to fight. But his eyes, they remained sharp, haunted, and constantly looking to the past. Especially when he looked at her. She sat across the room, motionless in a wooden rocking chair. Her once pale skin was now an eerie gray, like the sky before a thunderstorm. Her lips, cracked and colorless, rarely moved. But her eyes, they followed him. Always. Anna, he whispered her name like a prayer, the candlelight dancing in her glassy gaze. She didn't respond, not verbally. She never did. But her head tilted slightly, like she knew it meant something. Like she still remembered. He found her 3 years ago, wandering in a blood-soaked wedding dress, barefoot, hair tangled, a strange mix of innocence and horror. She wasn't like the others. She didn't lunge. Didn't growl. Didn't bite. Just stood there, trembling, moaning softly like she was scared. He should have ended her then. He knew the rules. But something in her eyes, something familiar, froze his hand. She reminded him of a woman he once knew. His real wife, now long gone. Maybe it was grief. Maybe madness. But he brought her home, named her Anna, and since then, they had lived together in this decaying farmhouse like shadows of a life that once existed. He didn't know who she was before the virus. Maybe a college student. Maybe someone's daughter, someone's love. She looked no older than 20, her features eerily preserved by the infection, as if time had stopped when death took her. But her eyes, they weren't empty. Not entirely. Thomas had observed her for months. She didn't attack animals. She didn't claw at the walls. When he played music, she swayed. When he cried, she would reach out, trembling, as if trying to understand. And once, just once, she spoke. "I know you." 3 words. A whisper from dead lips. That was all he needed. From then on, he believed she was different. Maybe a mutation. Maybe something deeper. He didn't care. He only knew one thing, she was the last flicker of warmth in a cold world. But even now, he questioned himself. Was it real love? Or just loneliness dressed in fantasy? That night, the candle flickered harder as a cold breeze slipped through a broken window pane. Thomas stood and crossed the room, his boots silent on the dusty floor. He knelt beside Anna's chair. "I'm going back to the city tomorrow," he said softly. "I need supplies. We're low on antibiotics, and food." Anna's head tilted again, and a low, soft moan escaped her throat. It wasn't threatening. It sounded, almost worried. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I'll come back. I promise." She blinked. Just once. That night, Thomas didn't sleep. He sat by the window, holding an old photo of his wife, the one who died before the virus took over the world. The resemblance to Anna was uncanny, and yet he knew it wasn't her. Couldn't be. But still. The next morning, with a machete strapped to his back and a faded red backpack slung over his shoulder, Thomas stepped out into the gray dawn. The city was a 2-day walk, through dangerous roads crawling with the infected. He looked back one last time. Anna stood at the window, hands pressed against the glass, staring. And for the first time since the outbreak, Thomas felt something strange rise in his chest, hope. Fragile, irrational, but real. She remembered something. And that meant there was still something left to fight for. Even love. Even now. The city was nothing more than a crumbling tomb now, a maze of collapsed buildings, burned-out cars, and the ever-present echo of silence. Thomas hated returning, but it was the only place left with any supplies. A risk, yes, but one he was willing to take, for her. He traveled alone, machete drawn, moving between shadows like a ghost. Every step brought memories. This used to be home. This very road once led to coffee shops, movie theaters, and bookstores. Now it led to broken glass, ash, and the occasional shuffling corpse. By midday, he reached the city's outskirts. He paused at the remains of a gas station, where he scavenged some water bottles and canned beans. He opened none of it, too loud. Always too loud. Sound meant death. In the distance, a low growl drifted through the air. Thomas froze, his pulse quickening. Through a shattered store window, he spotted them, 3 of the infected. Slowly moving. Eyes clouded, jaws slack, limbs twitching with a dead rhythm. He backed away and waited until they passed. He kept going. His destination wasn't random. It was a flower shop. Anna's Flowers, etched in fading cursive across its sign. He found it a year ago while scavenging. That was where he picked the first flower for her, an old, withered rose that somehow still clung to its stem in the greenhouse behind the shop. When he brought it home, she didn't bite it, didn't swat it away. She held it. Stared at it. And one tear slid from her cheek. That was the moment Thomas truly believed. She remembered something. Maybe not him. But love? Beauty? A connection to who she once was. That was enough. The streets leading to the shop were narrow and wrecked with debris, but eerily quiet. Thomas climbed over a flipped SUV, ducked under a collapsed awning, and finally reached the flower shop's door. The glass had long since shattered. Inside, vines crawled across the counter and shelves. Dust floated like snow in the shafts of afternoon light. He moved toward the back, toward the greenhouse. The glass walls were cracked, and most of the plants were dead, but one stubborn cluster of purple lilies had survived. He knelt beside them, awe filling his face. Life. Actual, uninfected life. In this dead place. He gently plucked one lily. Then paused. A rustle. From behind. He turned sharply, machete ready, but it wasn't a zombie. It was a young man, probably in his early 20s. Skinny. Wild eyes. Holding a rusted pistol. "Don't move," the stranger hissed, voice shaking. Thomas raised his hands slowly. "I'm not infected. Just here for supplies." The stranger eyed him with disbelief. "You're alone?" "I prefer it that way." The man lowered the gun a little. "Then you're crazy." "Maybe. But I'm still alive." A long silence. Then the stranger said, "Why come here?" "It's just a flower shop." Thomas looked at the lily in his hand. "Because someone I care about might remember it. Even now." The man laughed bitterly. "You're risking your life for a flower?" "No," Thomas replied quietly. "I'm risking it for love." That shut the stranger up. Eventually, they parted ways. The man warned him about a new horde moving through the north side of the city. Said they were faster now. Smarter. "They're changing," he muttered before disappearing into the ruins. That thought chilled Thomas more than the wind. He made it out of the city by sunset, Lily carefully wrapped in cloth and placed inside his pack. He was tired, but his pace quickened. He couldn't wait to get back. To see if she would hold it again, remember again. When he arrived at the farmhouse 2 days later, the door was ajar. His heart skipped. He drew his machete and pushed it open slowly. Inside, everything looked untouched, except the rocking chair. Empty. "Anna," he called, voice barely above a whisper. From the hallway came a soft moan. She stood there, eyes wide, body swaying. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, something moved. And Thomas felt the first real terror in a long time. Thomas didn't breathe. His machete trembled slightly in his grip as he stared at Anna in the dim hallway. Her head was tilted in that familiar way, like she was confused. Her pale arms hung by her sides, unmoving. But behind her, just barely visible in the shadows, something shifted. A foot dragged. A low groan echoed. "Anna," he whispered carefully, trying to keep his voice calm, "step aside." She didn't move. Just stared. Then slowly, as if understanding, she turned and looked behind her. Thomas took a few cautious steps forward, machete raised. That's when he saw it. Another one. A zombie. Male, tall, with a shredded hoodie clinging to its decaying frame. But something was off. It wasn't attacking. It stood beside Anna like a stray dog, sniffing the air, twitching slightly, as if aware of its surroundings but unsure what to do. And Anna? She wasn't afraid. If anything, she seemed protective. Thomas's mind raced. Could this one be like her? Anna turned back to him, her eyes locking with his. Then, slowly, she raised her hand and pointed to the flower in his bag. Thomas, cautiously, reached inside and pulled out the wrapped lily. Her eyes lit up, not in a human way, but with something close. Recognition. Sadness. Hope. She took one slow step forward. Then another. The male zombie followed behind her. Thomas tensed, but didn't swing. He could have ended it right then, but something about the way Anna turned to glance at the other one stopped him. It wasn't random behavior. It was deliberate. Anna extended her hand. He gently placed the flower into it. She looked down at it, then up at him. Then, to his absolute shock, she whispered, "Brother." The word chilled him. Not because of how she said it, but that she said it. Was the other zombie her actual brother? Was that memory buried in her dying brain, still intact somewhere beneath the infection? Thomas took a step back and lowered his weapon. "Is he, like you?" he asked softly. She didn't answer. Just turned and walked back into the hallway, the male zombie trailing behind. He didn't growl. Didn't snap. He just followed her like a lost child. Thomas followed slowly, still gripping the machete, unsure whether he was witnessing something beautiful or horrifying. Inside the living room, Anna sat in the rocking chair again, the lily resting on her lap. The other zombie stood near the window, staring out, silent. Thomas didn't sit. He couldn't. His mind was spiraling. One was rare. But two? Could there be others? Could this virus change in certain people, leave behind fragments of memory, of personality? If Anna could remember love, and this thing could follow her like a sibling. Were the undead evolving? Thomas knew one thing for sure, this changed everything. He had to find out more. But how? He stared at the two of them, one clutching a flower, the other staring into the dusk, and realized the line between human and monster was thinner than anyone imagined. Later that night, as he tried to sleep with one eye open, Anna moaned softly in her chair. "Thomas." He sat up, heart pounding. She'd never said his name before. But now she had. He didn't know whether to feel joy, or dread. The name still echoed in Thomas's ears like the final note of a haunting song. Thomas. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't his imagination. She said it. Anna said his name. He sat frozen in the darkness of the farmhouse, the dim candlelight flickering across her face as she sat with the lily still clutched in her lap. Her eyes were fixed on him, like they were trying to find something, or remember something. And just behind her, the other one, her so-called brother, stood quietly by the window. Still. Silent. Watching. Thomas had faced raiders. Packs of infected. The screaming chaos of civilization's collapse. But nothing unnerved him like this, two creatures of death sitting quietly in his home. Not snarling. Not attacking. Not dead, but something else. He didn't sleep that night. At dawn, Thomas made a decision. He couldn't keep this to himself anymore. If Anna, and now her brother, were showing signs of memory, behavior, and restraint, then the infection was doing more than just reanimating corpses. It was mutating. Evolving. And that meant one terrifying possibility. The infected were thinking. And if they were thinking, they might be planning. Thomas packed his gear. Just enough food, ammo, and notes to get by. He needed answers, and there was only one person he could think of who might help. A woman named Dr. Elise Harrow. Former CDC virologist. Brilliant. Paranoid. Last known to be hiding out in an old hospital in the hills, 5 days north. He left that morning, but not before saying goodbye. He knelt in front of Anna. She blinked slowly, as if aware he was leaving. Then, to his disbelief, she raised the lily to his chest and gently pressed it there. Thomas swallowed hard. "I'll come back," he whispered. "I'll find out what's happening to you. I promise." As he stepped out, he cast one last look back. Anna was still staring. But her brother? He wasn't looking at Thomas. He was looking past him. Toward the trees. Like he sensed something. Thomas turned to look too. Nothing. Just wind in the grass and the skeletal outlines of trees. But the feeling stayed with him. Like something unseen had already noticed the shift. 3 days into the journey, Thomas reached the edge of an abandoned roadside diner. He scavenged quietly, careful not to attract attention. But he wasn't alone. He heard it before he saw it. Not the typical dragging moan of the undead, but whispers. Human whispers. He crept toward the back, weapon ready. And that's when he saw them. Not infected. Not fully. A small group, 5 in total. All silent, expressionless. Skin slightly pale, eyes glassy but not dead. One of them stared directly at Thomas. And smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a knowing one. They didn't attack. Didn't move. Just watched. Thomas backed away, adrenaline crashing through his chest. They knew he was there. And they let him leave. That night, he lit a fire in an abandoned barn. The wind howled through the slats, but the chill in his bones didn't come from the cold. The undead were changing. Not all of them. But some. Some were remembering. Some were communicating. And some, like those he saw today, were waiting. For what? Thomas didn't know yet. But he feared that Anna and her brother were only the beginning. And the real horror wasn't in what the undead had lost, but in what they were starting to regain. The rain had started just before dawn. Cold, relentless, and almost theatrical in its timing, like the world itself knew that what Thomas was walking into was darker than anything he'd faced before. The abandoned St. Callista Hospital loomed in the distance like a ghost from another time. Vines had crawled up its sides. Windows were either broken or sealed shut with plywood and steel. The silence that surrounded it was wrong, not the quiet of emptiness, but the quiet of something waiting. Thomas approached the emergency entrance and tapped twice, then 3 times, then once. It was a pattern Elise had taught him long ago, back when the world was just starting to burn. A sliding peephole creaked open. Then, silence. "Thomas," he said, voice low. "I need to talk to her." The door unlocked. Slowly. Inside, the air was sterile, the kind of cleanliness that felt forced, almost desperate. Battery-powered lights buzzed overhead. The smell of disinfectant masked something else underneath, decay, just barely hidden. He was led through the hallways by a short, stern woman with a revolver tucked in her belt. She didn't speak. Just nodded toward the surgical wing. Dr. Elise Harrow stood over a metal table, her long gray coat stained and worn. Her hair was tied back in a messy knot. She looked up when she saw him, and for a moment, her eyes widened, not in surprise, but in recognition of what he might be bringing with him. "You've seen it," she said. Thomas nodded. "I need answers." She walked past him and locked the double doors. Then turned back. "How much do you know?" He set his pack down and pulled out a small notebook. Inside were pages of notes, Anna's reactions to flowers, words she whispered, and most chilling of all, how she protected her brother. Elise scanned it, her face unreadable. Then she said the words Thomas was dreading. "You're not the only one." Thomas stiffened. "What do you mean?" She moved to a shelf, pulled out an old digital recorder, and pressed play. The voice that came out was male. Weak. But it was what he said that made Thomas's stomach tighten. "She remembered my name. She cried. She cried, Doc. I didn't think they could do that." Another voice, Elise's, responded on the tape. "Did she speak again?" "She said, 'Don't go.' That's what she used to say, when I'd leave for work." The tape clicked off. "She died 3 days later," Elise said quietly. "But not from the virus. She starved. Refused to feed. Just sat there holding a picture." Thomas sat down, stunned. "How is this possible?" he asked. Elise moved toward a board covered in notes, sketches, and molecular diagrams. "The virus is mutating," she explained. "Originally, it hijacked the brain, wiped out everything but primal instinct. But now, it's doing something else. Instead of destroying memory centers, it's rewiring them. And the early infected, like your wife, they're holding on to fragments." "Memories," Thomas whispered. "Yes. Feelings. Words. Faces." She turned, serious. "They're not human anymore, Thomas. But they're not just dead either. They're becoming something new." He felt like the air had been knocked out of him. "But that's not the worst part," Elise continued. "The ones who remember. They're connecting. Like Anna and the man with her?" "Exactly. There's a link forming. Emotional. Possibly even psychic. We've seen small groups behaving like packs, moving with purpose, avoiding danger, reacting to loss. Some even show signs of pain." Thomas looked down at the notebook again. At the page where he'd written the single word she spoke, Thomas. "She remembered me." "Yes," Elise said softly. "And if she remembers you, Thomas, then she might be calling to others like her." He froze. "You think she's, what? A beacon?" "Maybe not intentionally. But memory is a powerful force. The infected are drawn to familiarity, to emotion, to places that mattered. And if enough of them gather, if they start learning." Elise didn't need to finish the sentence. It was already forming in Thomas's head. What if the next wave of the undead didn't just moan and wander? What if they remembered how to open doors? How to hate? How to hunt? He stood, breath shaky. "I have to go back. I have to make sure she's safe. If they're coming." "She won't be safe," Elise said coldly. "None of us will." The road back to the farmhouse was thick with fog and something else, something heavier than the air. A presence. A knowing. Every rustling leaf, every distant groan sent Thomas's instincts into overdrive. The closer he got, the more he felt it. They weren't just wandering anymore, they were waiting. By the time the roof of the farmhouse peaked above the trees, his heart had settled into a constant thud of dread. He crouched near the ridge just before the clearing and scanned the area with binoculars. They were there. Dozens of them. Not charging. Not howling. Just standing. Motionless. Surrounding the farmhouse like mourners at a funeral. Some swayed slightly. Some stared at the house. One dragged a broken toy along the ground in slow, looping circles. And in the center, on the porch, sat Anna. Her lily had wilted. Thomas's throat clenched. He watched as she slowly turned her head toward the treeline, toward him, even though he hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. She knew he was there. And more than that, the others began turning too. One by one. Until 30 sets of dead, pale eyes were fixed on the woods, fixed on him. Thomas slowly backed away, heart hammering in his ears. They remembered him. And they were waiting. He made camp a mile out, hidden beneath the remains of an overturned truck. All night, he could hear them. No growling. No feeding frenzy. Just the shuffle of feet. The creak of old wood. The wind carrying faint, wordless moans that almost sounded mournful. He barely slept. By morning, he had a plan. If they were gathering for Anna, if her memories were drawing them together, then she was the key. Not just to understanding the virus, but maybe to ending it. Or controlling it. He moved through the woods with practiced care, flanking the farmhouse from the west. It took hours to get into position. The undead didn't seem aggressive, but they reacted to motion, sound, maybe even emotion. It wasn't random anymore. He slipped into the barn out back, where he'd once stored emergency supplies. It was dusty, the air stale, but untouched. Until he heard it. A voice. Faint. Familiar. Thomas. He froze. Not Anna. Another. Lower. Rougher. He crept toward the slats in the barn wall and peered through. There, across the clearing. The male zombie. Anna's brother. Staring at the barn. Speaking. Repeating. Thomas. Thomas staggered backward. They were talking. They knew his name. His mind raced. The infected didn't just mimic anymore. They remembered. They identified. They communicated. And worst of all, they were coordinating. He sat on the barn floor, stunned, as the sun began to dip behind the trees. And then, all at once, the silence shattered. A gunshot. One. Then another. Followed by screams. Human screams. He jumped to his feet and raced to the wall again. Through the cracks, he saw a group of survivors, 5 or 6, armed, ragged, and clearly desperate. They'd stumbled into the clearing, guns raised. One of them fired at a zombie near the porch. Anna didn't move. But the others? They did. In unison. The horde rushed forward, not wild, but precise, like soldiers defending a queen. It wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. Thomas watched, horrified, as the survivors were overrun in seconds. Not torn apart like usual, but pinned. Held down. Studied. And then, chillingly, silenced. When it was over, the infected returned to their places. Some dragged the bodies to the edge of the clearing. One even buried a corpse beneath a pile of leaves. Thomas's skin crawled. They weren't just defending her. They were protecting their own. And maybe, just maybe, planning for more. Because these weren't just undead anymore. They were a community. And he had no idea where he fit in it, or how long Anna's memory of him would keep him safe. Thomas couldn't feel his legs. He wasn't sure how long he had sat there, crouched in the shadows of the barn, the ghost of Anna's voice echoing in his mind. The massacre he had just witnessed hadn't been chaos, it had been strategy. These infected weren't wild monsters. They were evolving. And she, his Anna, was at the center of it all. When the sun began to rise, he moved. Slowly. Quietly. He approached the farmhouse from the rear, using the tall grass for cover. The horde was still scattered in the clearing, standing guard like statues. Some were turned away, others seemingly asleep on their feet. They didn't react to his scent or steps. Not this time. As if she had told them he was allowed. When he reached the porch, his heart thundered like a warning drum. Anna sat in the same spot. Motionless. The lily now fully withered in her hand. Her head lifted. And her eyes met his. They weren't human, but they weren't empty either. They were remembering. He stepped closer. Anna, his voice cracked like broken glass. It's me. It's Thomas. She tilted her head, slowly. And then. Thomas, she whispered. One word. Enough to shatter every piece of logic still clinging to his brain. She stood, stiff but graceful, like her limbs remembered how they once danced. She reached out, not to bite, not to claw, but to touch. Her fingers grazed his face, cold and dry but careful. Like she was afraid he might disappear. And then, she turned. Motioned for him to follow. He obeyed. Inside the house, the living room had changed. Blankets, pillows, and old family photos had been arranged into a kind of shrine. In the center stood a cracked mirror, and before it, the male zombie, her brother, the one who had spoken his name. He turned when Thomas entered. And for the first time, Thomas saw recognition in a corpse's face. Like the man had once been someone he knew. Like he still was. Anna led Thomas to the center of the room. She looked around at the objects, then at him, and slowly pointed to a photo on the wall. A wedding picture. Not of Thomas and Anna. But of the man beside the mirror, and someone who looked just like her. Thomas's blood ran cold. The man was her real husband. Anna's memories weren't hers alone. They were shared. This place, it was a nest, yes. But more than that, it was a hive. Anna and the man were the center of it. Not through dominance, but through memory. Through emotion. Somehow, their bond had extended beyond death, infecting others with the idea of who they had been. A collective mind formed not by biology, but by grief and love twisted into something terrifying. And now Thomas was inside it. He looked at Anna again, searching for a trace of the woman he'd grown to love, this undead stranger who had shown mercy when none else did. "Do you remember us?" he asked softly. She blinked. Then nodded. Slowly. Like the weight of that memory hurt. And then she turned again. Walked toward the basement door. She opened it, and descended. Thomas followed, even as his instincts screamed. The air grew colder, damper, filled with the musty scent of earth and old rot. At the bottom, he found it. A room filled with drawings, childlike sketches made in charcoal and blood. Scenes of love. Of grief. Of rage. Anna and the man, holding hands. A world burning. Thomas, standing alone. And on the far wall. A mural. Of all the undead. Forming a circle. With her in the center. The queen. But beside her. A man with dark eyes. Holding a weapon. Torn between protecting her and destroying her. Him. Thomas fell to his knees. This wasn't a love story anymore. It was prophecy. And he was standing in the middle of it. Thomas stood in the basement, surrounded by memories that weren't his. Charcoal drawings lined the walls, images of love, death, and something worse, hope twisted into horror. Anna hadn't just remembered him, she had preserved him. Etched his face onto these walls like he was her anchor, her guide, or her weapon. And in the center of it all, her. Anna, staring at the mural as if seeing it for the first time, as if the version of herself it depicted had been waiting for him to arrive. Behind her, the brother stood still. Silent. A sentry. Watching Thomas with eyes that flickered with intelligence and pain. Thomas's voice was barely more than a whisper. "Is this what you wanted to show me?" Anna turned. And nodded. Then pointed to the final image. Two figures. One holding the other. One dying. One crying. No blood. No violence. Just release. He shook his head. "No. No, I'm not going to hurt you. I came back for you. I still." He choked on the word. Could he say it? Could he love her? As she was? Even now? Anna stepped forward and gently touched the side of his face. Her fingers trembled. Whether from the virus or from something deeper, Thomas couldn't tell. "I remember, dancing," she murmured. Her voice was broken, dry like leaves scraping pavement. "You," smiled. A tear ran down Thomas's cheek. "You're in there," he said. "I know you are." But that truth carried a darker realization. She was in there. Trapped. And the longer she remained, the more the hive grew. More undead gathering. More voices joining the silent song of memory and pain. If he didn't end it now, if he left her like this, the world wouldn't fall to violence. It would fall to grief. To the aching, collective sorrow of 1,000 minds remembering love, loss, and rage. And becoming something else. Something worse than monsters. Something human, without humanity. He fell to his knees before her. "I can't kill you," he whispered. "But I can't let you go on like this either." Anna crouched in front of him. She reached into her coat. And pulled out the pistol he'd left behind the first time he fled. Held it out. Handle first. Tears blurred his vision. She was asking him. Not to end her life. But to end the curse of remembering. The pain. The pull. The hive. This wasn't a mercy killing. This was a final act of love. Thomas took the weapon, hands shaking. Anna smiled. Not a twisted, undead grin. A real one. Faint. Beautiful. And full of peace. He pressed his forehead to hers one last time. "I love you, Anna." "I know," she whispered. The shot rang out like thunder. The silence that followed was louder. 3 days later, Thomas sat by a river far from the farmhouse. The undead? They had scattered. Without their queen, the hive broke apart. The memory tie dissolved. Those that wandered now did so aimlessly again, lost in the fog of the virus. Dangerous, yes, but no longer sentient. No longer mourning. He didn't know if he'd done the right thing. He didn't know if the world could be fixed. But he knew this. He hadn't lost Anna to the virus. He had said goodbye to her soul. On her terms. And that made all the difference. The sun rose, soft and golden. And in the breeze, he swore he could still smell lilies. The end.